Welcome back. South Africa observes the 47th anniversary of June 16 today. This year's Youth Month is celebrated under the theme Accelerating Youth Economic Emancipation for a Sustainable Future. But with all the commemorations, what does the future hold for South Africa's youth? For more on this, we are now joined by Dimpho Lekgeu, a community manager at Youth Lab and National Youth Development Agency Executive Chairperson Asanda Luwaca. Thank you for joining us this evening, ladies. Now, the youth of 1976 were able to galvanize themselves in coming out for a cause against the educational policies of that time. The youth of today, we've seen with hashtag Fees Must Fall, have also come out against the inequalities and the access of higher education that we are now experiencing in South Africa. Do you believe that the youth of 1976 have influenced that passion and that fire amongst the youth of today? Dimpho?
Sure, what a big question. Thanks for having us, Katleho, and happy Youth Day. I think absolutely. I think that the youth of 1976 have definitely inspired the passion and the activism of the youth of this generation. But I think it's not only that. I think that the youth of this generation has also found that similarly to the youth of 1976, there is a cause that we need to fight for. In fact, there are several. In order to, create a society where young people are active socially and economically, but also a society where young people feel like they belong and they feel like they can self-actualize. And so, I think that when you look at things like Fees Must Fall, even just having that audacity to organize as young people, to recognize that there is something happening in the system that is a hindrance to the prosperity of young people, and it needs to change, and being able to organize around that and taking to the streets, even when there's the threat of police and the threat of, security in universities. That audacity is definitely inspired by the youth of 1976, but I also think that as young people, we are just faced with so many challenges that it almost feels like we do not have a choice but to organize and demand our own form of justice and change like the youth of 47 years ago.
And Asanda, being part of the NYDA, your primary focus is to see these issues and to address the issues that the young people of today are facing. Are you finding that that spark and that passion is hindered by some of the issues that they are faced with?
No, thanks for having me on your show, Katleho. So definitely, I think one, when you look at, the role that the youth played of 1976 and contextualize it with the role of an agency such as the NYDA, I think what's important is for us to have that appreciation of, whilst we would have celebrated political freedom, for instance, in 1994, the economic freedom is something that still leaves much to be desired amongst young people. So it is precisely then what necessitated the establishment of an agency such as the National Youth Development Agency, so that we are able then to bridge that gap and ensure that, where there are young people, that we are able then to provide, the necessary, particularly economic opportunities for them, so that, we don't just speak about a youth of yesterday, without having the context of where we are, where we come from, and the current, or contextualizing it to the current struggles of the day.
And in bridging that gap, that economic gap for our young people, are we edging anywhere closer in ensuring that we are reaching the goals that have been set out for us, for them to find that economic emancipation? Asanda?
Sorry, Katleho, can you repeat your question?
I'm just saying, in that when you're saying that the aim is to bridge the gap, that economic emancipation gap for young people in South Africa, are we edging anywhere closer in ensuring that that gap is filled?
Sorry, Katlego, my connection seems to be unstable.
Okay,
I'm just struggling to...
All right, that's fine, Asanda. I think what we'll try and do is re-establish the line with you so we can continue with this conversation. But maybe I should then pose this question to you, Dimpho, especially working with young people on a daily basis. Are you finding that with young people trying to find jobs, trying to emancipate themselves economically, are we edging anywhere closer to that goal?
The truth is that we're not. And, I have to be blunt. I think that this time calls for it. But I don't want to sound like a pessimist, so I'll take this route. While there is a lot of work that is being done to try and inspire the social and economic productivity of young people, the impact is simply not far-reaching enough to address the scale of the issue that we're facing as far as the economic participation of young people and youth unemployment is concerned. I mean, when you look at the quarterly labor force survey that came out just now, I think towards the end of April, youth unemployment got worse in the first quarter of this year. So about 250,000 young people who had jobs when this year began are now without jobs. This afternoon, I was in Tshwane as part of the Nasi Spani campaign that the Premier of Gauteng and the Office of the Premier launched today, where they were advertising different job opportunities within the province. And I mean, the snaking queues, right, that were there just in the center that I was deployed in, which is in Attridgeville, are absolutely heartbreaking. And to think that that's the situation in each and every center here in Gauteng, and there were, I think, about 20 of them, right? I think that speaks to the desperation of young people, but also it just speaks to the urgency of the situation of youth unemployment. I think oftentimes we talk about the numbers and we talk about 62% of, the youth are unemployed, 7 out of 10 young people, but these are people's stories, right? These are young people that have stories that are held back from self-actualizing, that are held back from fully participating in the society because they're unable to find jobs, whether they're educated or not. But on the other hand, like I said at the beginning of my answer, there is work that is being done. We know about the Youth Employment Service that the President launched a couple of years ago. The Youth Employment Service has underperformed. The President had projected about 1 million job opportunities for young people. The last I checked, I think the agency was sitting at about 250 job opportunities. And we also need to appreciate that these are entry-level job opportunities that allow young people to gain enough experience so that they can move on to find more permanent jobs, right? So we're not talking about actual jobs that are lasting for young people. These are just job opportunities. There are things like the National Youth Service, for example. There's also a lot of work being done within the civil society sector that I work in to empower young people through education, through skills, so that they're able to take part in economic activity. But unfortunately, the truth is we're not making a great enough impact at the rates at which the impact needs to happen to reach the young people in this country who need opportunity. I think we're sitting at about 9 million young people across the country who are part of the need statistic. That means they're neither in employment, education, or training. And that is alarming.
It certainly is alarming. I think, Asanda, we've reestablished our line with you. As the NYDA, when you speak of youth empowerment, what exactly are you trying to achieve?
Yeah. So I think, one, when we speak about, youth empowerment, there's an appreciation that it is a holistic approach to youth development and youth empowerment. So we can't speak about youth development in isolation, right? Because fundamentally, where there is a society, ultimately, if you break it down and segment it further, there is youth development in the education space. There's youth development in the business space, in the private sector space, in civil society, and, right? So ultimately, we as an agency would want to really underscore and inculcate a holistic approach to youth development with the objective of achieving youth empowerment, because we also have an appreciation that we can't do it alone. We can't do it in silos. And it speaks about, how do we bring in the various partners, the stakeholders, so that we have that collective collaboration and we take collective ownership insofar as youth development and youth empowerment is concerned. But I think also linked to this would also be an appreciation that, whilst, yes, there hasn't been that impact that could be felt on the ground, right? But, when we speak about youth empowerment in its totality, we also can't have that discussion in isolation of the sluggish growth of our economy. So the first step would obviously be, how do we get our economy going? But specifically then, what does that mean for young people is that, we've spoken about your presidential youth employment intervention. And we need to also have an appreciation that there's been several strides that have been made. For instance, we have the establishment of the National Pathway Management Network. We have our SA Youth.mobi network, which is a zero-rated platform that links prospective employers with prospective employees. So ultimately, it brings work opportunities closer to young people. But, you also have other interventions such as the basic education teacher assistant program that is really doing great. But what becomes important with all these initiatives is also the idea of us institutionalizing them. So, for instance, your Presidential Youth Employment Initiative should be coming to an end at the end of this current administration. But how do we institutionalize them so that they live beyond 2024? So that, we are having a far greater impact on these initiatives and that they are able to live or outlive the current dispensation or current administration.
That certainly is a very important fact. I mean, we see so many initiatives being started, and once an administration then moves out, we then restart with new initiatives without carrying forward those that seemingly seem to work. What would you then, Asanda, say it is that we do that is failing the youth of today?
So I think what we would need to do, and I guess maybe going back to my response would be having an appreciation of taking or continuing on the initiatives that we are starting to see that they are yielding the positive results. And having that would require us institutionalizing those particular initiatives so that they are able to outlive even beyond a administration, a dispensation, and that we are able then to even begin a process of tracking the progress on a medium-term basis. So if we were able to say that each initiative is assessed according to a medium-term strategic framework, which is a 5-year period, then at every 5-year intervals, then we should be able to come back and assess the progress or failures and what lessons could ultimately be learned from those particular initiatives.
Now, Dimpho, Asanda speaks of being aware of the sluggish economy that we are currently experiencing in us trying to attain the objectives with the young people in South Africa. But how do we ensure immediate impact of these initiatives that we are rolling out in order for our youth to be emancipated?
Yeah, one of the things that we prioritize at the Youth Lab is youth participation in policy and decision making. And what that means is you cannot create programs and interventions that are meant to empower young people without their input. And oftentimes we sit and we create these programs and we go into communities and we want to roll them out. And when there's poor uptake from young people, we wonder why. And that's because we did not involve them in the process of creation. I think co-creation with young people is important. Viewing young people as stakeholders rather than beneficiaries of the programs and the interventions that we create, whether that's us in the civil society space or even nationally and from government. I attended a screening of a documentary where young people who are part of the community work program by Community Safety were giving feedback on the different ways in which that program had an impact on their lives. And one of the things that were mentioned in the room is that in the beginning the program had a very, very poor uptake, even though it kind of ticked the boxes. And once once young people were brought into a room and really asked for their opinion and their ideas, they simply said that we want to be part of the program, we do see value in this program, but we just simply don't want to wear the orange overalls, for example. And so sometimes we wonder why the programs that we create are not reaching young people, but we're not talking to them, and we're talking at them, and we're creating for them instead of with them. So I think strengthening the youth participation aspect in the co-creation process is very important if we want to see the kind of impact that we envision on the ground.
And why do you believe that disconnect between the youth and those that create these programs exists so much? I mean, we've been hearing this as a theme to say, involve the youth, include the youth so that they can participate in that which you're laying out. Why do we still find that it's still consistent that we're not including them in the discussions at the table?
Yeah, I think it just goes back to what I said earlier. I think we view young people as beneficiaries and not stakeholders in their own development. And I think that's very dangerous. One thing that I think I have learned on this job is the fact that young people have ideas about how to solve problems, particularly in their communities, because they experience those challenges firsthand. And so even when we go into communities to introduce programs, for example, you'll find that there's already something that is happening on a smaller scale that young people would have already created with little to no resources as an intervention. And so young people have ideas about how to resolve their challenges, but also how to resolve the challenges within their communities. I think what often happens is that we sit, with research and numbers and statistics, and we decide on behalf of young people without really creating platforms where we're meaningfully engaging with them and we're actively listening to them, and not from a tokenistic point of view where we're just ticking boxes, but truly engaging young people and allowing their lived experiences of all of these challenges that we're talking about today to be the thing that shapes the policies, that shapes the decisions, and ultimately the programs and initiatives that we roll out in communities.
All right, ladies, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us this evening on this Youth Day, discussing the prospects of how our youth can be emancipated and move themselves forward. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Youth Lab Community Manager Dimpho Lekgeu and National Youth Development Agency Executive Chairperson Asanda Luwaca.